I did my blog this week on desirable difficulties, but this kind of expands on what I said because I didn't want my blog to be too lengthy. So I thought I'd start it with a quote, and that quote is: "The conventionalities of portrait painting are only tolerable in one who is a good painter. If he is only a good portrait painter, he is nobody. Try to become a painter first and then apply your knowledge to a special branch, but do not begin by learning what is required for a special branch or you become a mannerist." I basically think that means that you can learn to do something, but that doesn't necessarily mean that you understand how to do it. And basically you should understand how to do what you're trying to, the basics of everything that you're trying to do, so you can take what you know and apply it in numerous different areas. If you know how to do something in just one area, it's not particularly impressive and you're not going to go very far if you only know how to do something in relation to that one thing. Okay, so the goals of education are to enable the learner to retain and use information outside of education, and they're long-term goals because you need to survive to the end of education and also in the real world, way after you leave education. The information needs to be readily available after periods of disuse, so you can't just forget about it and then not be able to get to it if you need it in later life. You need to create a mental representation to allow flexible access to what's being learned, which means that you can go to what you know and bend it around things that you need to do. So you know something, you need to do something else that's different, but you can still take what you know and apply it, so you can do that and mold your knowledge around it. And the learner should know when information is and is not applicable in any given situation. So you should be able to to know when to do something and when to not do something in terms of what you know. In terms of human memory, that means that education should make a stored representation of knowledge in long-term memory, but it should be recallable as time passes and the contextual cues change. So that should have no effect on your knowledge at all. It should just be there. You should be able to access it regardless of how long it's been since you learned it and where you are and everything like that. And it's basically the explicit processing that we want to target and not implicit processing. So everything that you learn is either explicitly or implicitly processed. And implicit means that you're not likely to get it back after a long time, whereas explicit, it's there, you know it. Okay, so there are numerous types of desirable difficulties, and the first one is varying the conditions of practice, which is where you introduce variety to what you're doing. You introduce variety to the material and how you present it, or you introduce unpredictability to the contextual area. They found that in regards to motor movement tasks, randomly arranging the tasks as opposed to blocking them on task type was really effective. This might cause difficulty for the learner over time, but it enhances long-term performance. And this, although it impaired performance at the time, they were able to do it a while after they were taught it. Okay, this one's quite text-heavy, and I don't know why, but you can provide contextual interference, and people think that varying the conditions of practice is basically just under this broader term of contextual interference. Another way you can do it is you can design materials in a way that causes temporary difficulty, so move things around and make things a little bit confusing at the time, but they're more likely to remember it because they had to try more to learn it. And you can also add to task demands, so if it's really task heavy, they're kind of more likely to concentrate. Manson conducted an experiment and subjects had to learn the contents of a technical article, and this was after they looked at an outline that was either consistent or inconsistent with the article. And the inconsistent one, although they couldn't recall it all word for word, they could answer. They were better at inferring things about it because they concentrated more to try and learn, and they had to think back and remember because it wasn't all set out in exactly the same way as the article, the outline. Okay, distributing practice on a given task. This took me a while to get my head around because the wording of it was quite stupid, but if you distribute practice rather than putting it all together, so if like, say like you have something to learn and you mass it like on, right, this is what we're going to learn this week and this is what we're going to learn this week. People know what to expect and they're not really going to learn it. So if you kind of distribute it, like, well, we're going to do a bit of this week and then we'll go back to that next week, but we'll do something else this week as well. People kind of need to concentrate more because they have to see, like, you have to keep alert as to what they're learning because it's not just the same thing. And Barak did an experiment where you had to learn the Spanish translations of a list of 50 English words. And he alternated the trials as a study and test trials. And the participant had to respond in English correctly to in Spanish correctly to every English word. And the training sessions were separated by 0, 1 or 30 days. And at the beginning of each training session after the first one, the participants were tested on their memory for all 50 words. And with the 30-day separation, performance was poorest, like in the study trials and stuff. But when looking at long-term performance, it could be seen that participants' recall was significantly better after the 30-day separation as opposed to the 1 and the 0, because they could remember. They knew they had to kind of try and remember it more. Reducing feedback to the learner. Until recently, it was thought that providing a learner with like an abundance of feedback was really good, and that made people think that it should be more frequent, more immediate, and more accurate. But recently, it's been found that reducing the amount of feedback promotes better long-term performance, even though it inhibits performance at the time because people aren't really sure if they're doing well. But they demonstrated that providing summary feedback to subjects, so like after every 5 or 15 trials, or like if you fade it out over a set time, it inhibits the acquisition of simple motor skills, but it enhances long-term retention. So at the time, you're going to struggle because you're not quite sure what you're doing, but as it goes, you're going to retain more than you actually think you're retaining. Using tests as learning events. The active retrieval bottom by a recall test can be considered much more effective in aiding future recall. It's also been seen that prior testing can also like increase recall afterwards. Hogan and Kinch found that better recall was produced at the end of a session of study trial than with test trials, but the test trials produced better recall after 48 hours. And I think that's because if you have a test, you're thinking, and you have to write it down, and you need to concentrate, whereas if you're studying, you're just reading something. Like, you're not actually applying yourself to try and learn it. So why aren't desirable difficulties always implemented if there's so much evidence to suggest that they work? Some researchers believe that it's due to underexposure of research, but actually that's not the case. It's kind of overexposure, as in basically they've been taught this way and they think it worked for them when really it kind of didn't. But at the same time, like, they're also overexposed to the happiness and the performance of their trainees. So if you're teaching someone and they seem to understand it and they seem happy about it, then you're going to keep doing it the same way, even if, like, it says that, like, they don't see what happens afterwards, so they don't see if it fails or if it succeeds when you leave education. Like, and it's not really as important to them when you're gone, like, because they're not being evaluated on it anymore, like, because they get evaluated on the performance and the happiness of the people that they teach. It can be said that the teacher is a victim of operant conditioning, and the reinforcements are improvement in the performance and the happiness of the people that they're teaching. And the institutional setting can also be important because if their peers are like doing the exact same thing, they're not going to try and deviate, and like if it seems to be working, then they're not going to like stop it. And this can shift the teacher away from introducing desirable difficulties into education, because if the students seem to be struggling, they're not going to want to pursue it. Okay, in conclusion, it's clear that adding desirable difficulties into education would be useful to the learner and the teacher. However, some teachers fail to see this, and therefore it is often the case that they are overlooked in favour of faster responses at the time. And then, any questions?
I have a question. Do you think that these desirable difficulties are ignored because of things like the NSS and always being under the microscope? I mean, teachers in secondary and primary school, it's all about how many students pass their tests, and the league tables of schools are all about how many pass the test right now. And I know that Bjork talks a lot about performance indicators as opposed to learning, and that a lot of what teachers do maximize an immediate performance benefit.
Yeah, I think it has a lot to do with that. I think if people weren't scrutinized so much for how they teach, then they'd have time to introduce this. But if they're scrutinized on the performance now, people just assume that the performance now is going to mirror what happens in exams and stuff. And clearly, if you get it then and you don't do the exam, clearly you just didn't revise. But really,
one of the things that Bjork talked about in that paper that I find absolutely fascinating is the fact that we have designed a system that really maximizes people's performance. You can do the very best on tests, given the ways we teach currently. But that, in so many ways, is completely divorced from actual learning.
Yeah. Though that's what it is. You do something really well because you understand it at the time, but as time goes on and everything changes, you just lose it. So it's not really doing anything to aid you in the real world at all. So it needs changing.
Well, I think that's why we complain. Secondary school teachers complain that the students aren't coming properly prepared. University teachers complain that the students, and yet you look at their exam scores, and they're really good.
Yeah. But outside of those exams, they don't really know anything how to apply it. So. Okay. I'm done.